What would you do if your entire world changed in an instant? If the person you loved, the one you built your life with, left you with nothing but questions and heartbreak? Imagine being married for 30 years, 3 decades of shared dreams, arguments, victories, and failures, only to discover that everything you thought was yours, everything you worked towards, everything you believed in, was left to someone else. Not a family member, not a business partner, not even a close friend. No, the wealth, the estate, the very essence of the life you built together, was left to a quiet, unassuming figure who you barely noticed, until it was too late. This isn't a story of betrayal, nor is it one of revenge. It's a story of perspective, of love shown in ways that words could never capture. A story of kindness that thrived in the shadows, unnoticed by the people who believed they held the spotlight. And it all begins on a cold, gray morning in the suburbs of Chicago, where a frail man lay in his bed for the last time, surrounded by the opulence of a life well lived, but also by an emptiness only he could feel. What was he thinking as he signed his final will and testament, knowing the chaos it would bring? This is the story of a dying husband, a devoted wife, and an unexpected decision that would unravel secrets, test loyalties, and leave everyone questioning what truly matters. But here's the question you must ask yourself before we begin. If it were you, if you were the one left behind, how would you react? And more importantly, what would it reveal about your own life? In the quiet suburbs of Chicago, where tree-lined streets meet sprawling mansions, there stood a home that spoke of success and power. Its grand entrance was flanked by marble columns, and its vast windows gleamed in the pale light of a winter morning. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of fresh roses, a daily delivery to remind the residents of the beauty that wealth could buy. But upstairs, in a room that once echoed with laughter and lively conversations, silence reigned. There, on a grand 4-poster bed, lay Richard Lawson, a man whose name was synonymous with success. Richard had built his fortune from nothing, rising from a modest background to become a titan in the world of finance. His wealth was immense, his influence far-reaching, and his reputation spotless. Yet, as his frail hands gripped the edges of a silk duvet, none of it seemed to matter. His wife, Eleanor, sat by his side. For 30 years, Eleanor had been the perfect partner, poised, elegant, and always present at the grand galas and charity events that defined their social circle. But beneath her composed exterior lay a woman torn by the weight of their relationship. Theirs was a partnership forged more in ambition than love, a marriage that thrived on appearances rather than intimacy. Still, Eleanor had always believed that she was Richard's constant, the one person he would never forsake. And then there was Maria, the helper, a woman of quiet strength who had spent the last 5 years caring for Richard during his battle with illness. Maria was nothing extraordinary at first glance, her dark hair often tied back in a simple bun, her hands calloused from years of hard work. But her presence brought a calm to the Lawson household, her compassion filling the voids left by years of emotional distance. She had no titles, no grand gestures, no aspirations of grandeur. She simply served. The stakes were high, though no one in that house fully realized it yet. Richard's health was failing, and with it, the carefully constructed facade of their lives was beginning to crack. His decisions in those final days would not only define his legacy, but also lay bare the truth about the relationships he held most dear. Little did they know that when Richard signed his final will and testament, he set into motion a chain of events that would leave Eleanor questioning everything she thought she knew about her husband. It would force Maria into the spotlight in ways she never asked for. And it would bring the world face to face with a story of loyalty, love, and loss that would challenge the very meaning of family. As the morning sun broke through the heavy curtains of Richard's room, casting long shadows across the walls, the stage was set. Secrets were about to surface, and lives were about to change forever. The only question left was, how would they all react when the truth came to light? Richard's health had been declining for years. Once a towering figure in boardrooms and social gatherings, he was now confined to his bedroom. The man who had commanded empires could barely summon the strength to sit up in bed. His once sharp mind wandered, but in his lucid moments he reflected deeply on his life, his choices, and the people around him. Eleanor, his wife, was often absent. Her days were filled with obligations, fundraisers, charity galas, and social luncheons. To the outside world, she was the picture of a devoted spouse. But within the grand walls of their mansion, the distance between her and Richard was palpable. Conversations had become formalities, and the shared moments of laughter and connection were now distant memories. In contrast, Maria was always there. She wasn't just Richard's caretaker, she became his confidant, his anchor in an otherwise turbulent sea of regrets. While Eleanor was busy making appearances, Maria sat by Richard's bedside, listening to his stories about his childhood, his dreams, and even his fears. One winter evening, as the snow fell softly outside, Richard turned to Maria and said, "You remind me of what it means to truly care. Not for wealth, not for power, but for people. You've shown me a kindness I never knew I needed." Maria brushed it off with a smile, but those words stayed with Richard, guiding the decisions he was about to make. The morning of Richard's passing was quiet, almost serene. Eleanor had rushed back from a social engagement the night before, arriving just in time to sit by his side during his final moments. Maria, as always, was there, her calm presence steadying the room as Richard drew his last breath. The days following his death were a blur of preparations, condolences, and anticipation. For Eleanor, the reading of the will was a formality. She had no doubt that Richard's vast empire would remain in her hands. After all, she had been his wife for 30 years. But when the family gathered in the study, the air grew tense. The attorney, a meticulous man in his 60s, adjusted his glasses and began reading the will. The words echoed through the room.
"I, Richard Lawson, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate, including properties, investments, and all other assets, to Maria Gonzalez."
The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor's face froze in disbelief before twisting into fury. "This must be a mistake!" she exclaimed, her voice trembling. Maria's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. "This can't be right," she whispered, shaking her head. The attorney cleared his throat. "The document is clear and legally binding." For Eleanor, the betrayal felt like a dagger to her heart. She demanded explanations, accusing Maria of manipulation, of taking advantage of her husband in his vulnerable state. But Maria's reaction was genuine. She was as stunned as anyone in the room. Tears filled her eyes, not out of joy but out of an overwhelming sense of confusion and humility. As the dust began to settle, the reasons behind Richard's decision came to light. Eleanor discovered a box of journals Richard had kept during his final years. In them, he wrote candidly about his thoughts and feelings, exposing the cracks in their marriage. He wrote about the loneliness he felt, the times he reached out to Eleanor only to be met with indifference. He recounted moments when Maria's small acts of kindness, like bringing him his favorite tea or reading to him on sleepless nights, gave him a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. One entry stood out.
"True love is not in vows but in actions. Eleanor was my partner in ambition, but Maria was my partner in humanity."
Eleanor's shock turned to introspection as she began to see the parts of herself she had buried beneath a life of luxury. Flashbacks revealed moments that Maria herself had forgotten. The time she stayed up all night, holding Richard's hand as he battled a high fever. The days she went out of her way to ensure he ate, even when he had no appetite. The simple way she made him laugh when he needed it most. Richard's final words to Maria, recorded in a letter, were read aloud.
"Maria, you gave me the one thing I could never buy, genuine care. I only hope this gift helps you live the life you deserve."
The weight of those words lingered in the air, leaving everyone in the room to reflect on their own lives. Eleanor realized that wealth wasn't what Richard valued in the end. It was the kindness of a humble woman who had no ulterior motives, only a pure heart. The story doesn't end with the reading of the will. In fact, that was just the beginning of an unraveling far more profound than anyone could have anticipated. Think about it. What would you do if you were Eleanor? Would you feel betrayed by the man you spent decades with? Or would you see his decision as a form of justice? Perhaps it's easy to point fingers and cast blame, but let's take a closer look. Eleanor's initial reaction was anger, but beneath it lay a cocktail of emotions: humiliation, grief, and, most painfully, regret. Imagine being in her shoes, sitting in a room full of people, feeling the walls of your carefully constructed world crumble around you. She had built her life on the assumption that her partnership with Richard guaranteed her security, but in a single moment, that assumption vanished. But that wasn't the biggest twist. What came next changed everything. Days after the will was read, Eleanor received a package, an envelope addressed in Richard's handwriting. Inside was a letter. It began,
Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means my time has come. I know you must be angry, hurt, and confused. You have every right to be. But before you cast judgment, I ask that you hear me out.
The letter went on to recount moments Eleanor had long forgotten, or perhaps chosen to ignore. Richard wrote about the early days of their marriage, filled with love and ambition, and how over time their relationship became more about appearances than genuine connection. He didn't blame her entirely. He acknowledged his own role in their drifting apart. But he also wrote about a longing for something he couldn't find in their marriage: true, unconditional care. He explained why he left everything to Maria.
Maria reminded me of what it means to be truly seen. She didn't care about my wealth or status. She cared about me as a person. Her kindness was a light in my darkest days, and I wanted to honor that in the only way I knew how.
Now, ask yourself, how would you react to such a letter? Would it change the way you saw your partner, your marriage, or even yourself? Meanwhile, Maria was grappling with her own turmoil. The wealth she'd inherited was overwhelming, and the attention it brought was suffocating. For a woman who had lived a humble life, this newfound spotlight felt like a curse. People began to question her motives, accusing her of manipulating Richard, despite the evidence to the contrary. But Maria's actions spoke louder than words. Instead of indulging in luxury, she used her inheritance to give back. She donated to hospitals, funded scholarships, and created a foundation in Richard's name to support caregivers who, like her, dedicated their lives to helping others. And just when you thought the story had settled, another revelation emerged. Richard had included a clause in his will. The clause stated that Maria would receive the estate on one condition: she had to spend a portion of the wealth to repair the relationships Richard had left behind, starting with Eleanor.
True wealth,
Richard wrote,
is not in what we possess, but in what we give. I want my final act to be one of healing, not division.
Can you imagine the weight of such a responsibility? Maria could have easily ignored the clause, but instead, she embraced it. She reached out to Eleanor, not with pity, but with genuine empathy. They met for coffee, and over time, what began as tense, awkward conversations turned into a fragile but genuine friendship. So, let me ask you, if today were your last day, what legacy would you leave behind? Would it be one of resentment, or would it inspire healing and growth? As you think about that, let me leave you with this. Sometimes, the most shocking twists in life aren't found in the decisions others make, but in the truths those decisions force us to confront about ourselves. And the question is, are you ready to face those truths? As we reach the final chapter of this extraordinary story, let's take a moment to reflect. In the end, it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the estate or the inheritance. It wasn't even about who was right or wrong. It was about the legacy of choices, the ones made in silence, without fanfare, and often without recognition. Eleanor learned this the hard way. The wealth and status she once took for granted were stripped away, leaving her to confront the reality she had avoided for years, that her relationship with Richard was built on a fragile foundation. But here's where the story takes a turn. Instead of sinking into bitterness, Eleanor chose a different path. Through her meetings with Maria, she began to see the woman she had once resented as someone with a pure heart and a genuine love for her late husband. Not a romantic love, but the kind of love born from compassion and understanding. Eleanor began to question her own priorities and realized that the greatest wealth in life isn't material. It's found in the connections we nurture and the care we give to others. And Maria? She emerged as the quiet hero of this story, proving that true wealth lies in generosity and humility. By honoring Richard's wishes, she turned a potentially divisive situation into an opportunity for healing. She didn't just fulfill the terms of the will, she went beyond them, creating a legacy that would touch countless lives. But let's return to the question we asked at the beginning. What would you do if your spouse's final wish turned your world upside down? Would you hold on to resentment, or would you find a way to heal? Would you focus on what was lost, or would you embrace the chance to rebuild? This story is a reminder that life is unpredictable. The things we value most, relationships, love, trust, can shift in an instant. And when they do, we're faced with a choice: to resist the change or to grow from it. In Richard's final days, he made a decision that spoke volumes about the kind of man he wanted to be remembered as. Not a businessman or a wealthy patriarch, but as someone who valued kindness above all else. His wealth didn't buy loyalty or love, but it did leave behind a message. True love is not in vows, but in actions. So, what about you? If today were your last day, what message would you leave behind? What choices would define your legacy? And maybe, just maybe, the story of Richard, Eleanor, and Maria isn't just about them. Maybe it's about all of us, about the relationships we hold dear, the sacrifices we overlook, and the courage it takes to choose kindness, even when it's hard. So, what would you do if you discovered your world wasn't what it seemed? Would you embrace the truth, no matter how painful, or resist it in fear of what it might reveal? The answers to these questions define who we are, and they remind us of this. In the end, it's not the wealth we leave behind that matters. It's the love we give, the lives we touch, and the legacies we create, not in riches, but in kindness and compassion. Think about that, and if this story moved you, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do in Eleanor's place, or Maria's? And how would you want your story to be remembered? Let's keep this conversation going, because sometimes the stories that shock us the most are the ones that teach us the greatest lessons. Now that you've heard this remarkable story, the question is, what do you think? Did Richard make the right choice by leaving his wealth to Maria, the helper? Was Eleanor unfairly treated, or did her actions speak louder than her claims to his fortune? Your perspective matters. So, here's what I'd love for you to do. Take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. If you were in Richard's shoes, what would you have done? And if you were Eleanor or Maria, how would you have reacted? This story isn't just about inheritance or wealth. It's about relationships, values, and the legacies we leave behind. And stories like these have the power to inspire deep conversations. So, let's start one. But that's not all. If this tale of unexpected choices and life-altering twists resonated with you, I have one small favor to ask. Hit the like button. It lets us know you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking stories like this one. We explore the unexpected, the emotional, and the downright shocking, and there's so much more to come. Share this video with a friend who loves a good twist, or someone who might need a reminder of what truly matters in life. Every interaction helps us grow this community of storytellers, thinkers, and dreamers. People like you who find meaning in life's most unpredictable moments. And before you go, here's something to ponder. What's the legacy you're building? Not just in material wealth, but in kindness, compassion, and the lives you've touched. Think about it. And maybe even start a conversation with someone you care about. Thank you for watching, for thinking, and for being part of this journey. Until next time, remember, the greatest stories are the ones that leave us changed. So go out there and write your own.